3. 4D Clif here, back for another exciting One Piece video. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's get into this. So for today's video, I actually want to go over on exactly how will Luffy and the Straw Hats actually defeat the God Knights, alright? Now, to really get into it, to really explain this whole video in itself, the idea here is to basically look at the whole King's Haki situation here, okay? Because that definitely does seem to be the most important thing that Luffy and the Straw Hats definitely need to understand in order to actually defeat the God Knights, right? However, it also is not necessarily that easy, right? I mean, it's easy to say that, oh yes, you need to understand and how to use this King's Haki ability in order to actually deal damage to the God Knights, right? And by extent, the other Celestial Dragons in that sense, right? And to be honest here, in most cases when we're referring to Celestial Dragons, we're only referring to things like the Gorosei, Emu, and probably the God Knights, alright? I hardly doubt Emu himself, literally, like, if this is ability itself, like this whole regeneration thing comes from Emu, I imagine on an extent, it only applies to literally the Gorosei and the God Knights, okay? I can probably imagine that this power is not wasted on the whole low-level Celestial Dragons, alright? I can probably guarantee that none of those powers are actually given anything to them, alright? Given the fact that we never actually seen one of those low-level ones like that ever utilize it to extent, and they seem completely worthless to it, so I imagine Emo probably doesn't even waste his time on it, alright? But you see, this is actually something to point out here, right? Is that this whole regeneration thing that the God Knights can do, right? They can literally regenerate from any injury, right? Even when Luffy was utilizing Nika, his Nika form, along with Advanced Haki, he still wasn't doing anything, right? Now, Luffy himself just literally just unlocked a King's Haki, right? Well, I mean, he's had King Haki before, right? He's had it before, but he's just barely unlocked its advanced form, right? And when he was fighting against Kaido, he was still learning it, alright? So, to the point that even though Luffy actually beat Kaido and he won, at the same time, he never really mastered it, okay? He is not really a master of it, and that's something to get here, right? Luffy has got to learn to master this King's Haki. Because it definitely seems like the King's Haki is the key to actually defeating the God Knights, okay? And you see, that's actually something important to understand here, is that this King's Haki has never actually been shown to defeat a God Knight, right? It's never been shown to defeat them, but it has been shown to delay them, right? Which in itself is also something to really ask here, okay? So take consideration of this, right? When Garling was facing off against Rocks, Garling did mention that it was going to take a while for the regeneration ability to kick in, right? Meaning that his King's Haki must have been insanely powerful. But it didn't necessarily defeat Garling, it just basically delayed the inevitable, right? And that is something to really ask about, okay? Well, wait a minute, hold on. If the King's Haki that we've seen so far can only delay the inevitable, preventing them from regenerating from a shorter time, then in that case here, well, wait a minute, hold on. If that's the case, then even if by extent that you have a whole entire massive, like, say for instance, right, you have Luffy who can actually utilize the King's Haki ability and stuff like that, and actually, deal damage to the Gorosei and the God Knights and all that, and he basically slows down the process of them actually, learning or basically regenerating to a faster extent and only delays it. Eventually, over time, they're going to come back, okay? Like, you literally think about it, they're going to come back, right? Even if you basically delay their regeneration thing to an extent, they're going to come back. So to the point here, you have to think, well, wait a minute, hold on, doesn't that mean that you're going to have to try and keep learning and keep introducing more and more people as time goes on to unlock this King's Haki ability and not have it die out? Because, I mean, if you think about it, literally when it comes to King's Haki, most of the people who we've been introduced to unlock who has King's Haki is mostly dead. And some of them, while they know it, but at the same time, their experience of it is really nothing, okay? I mean, like, the most recent person alive currently, well, a few of them necessarily who are alive currently with very exceptional, powerful King's Haki ability that has been shown is characters like Rayleigh, Shanks, Scalper Gabon. These three themselves have definitely been shown to utilize powerful King's Haki, right? And you have others as well and all that kind of stuff, okay? And even by the means of it, if this King's Haki ability is what the Straw Hats and Luffy needs to actually figure out in order to defeat the God Knights, okay? Scalper even basically stated that he shouldn't take the God Knights lightly, right? That this King's Haki ability is by no means something to basically ignore. Right? It's something to not really... To put it simple here, he basically stated that by no means the God Knights are immortal, right? Like, they're not technically mortal, which means they can be defeated. But the question is, well, wait a minute. If they can be defeated and the King's Haki is the thing to actually help that, then why is it that King's Haki is only delaying the regeneration ability, right? Why is it only delaying it? How come we have never seen a God's Knights actually defeated for the sake of the King's Haki ability, right? Like, even when in God's Valley, even when we're in the situation God's Valley and stuff like that, it's the same thing there, right? We're seeing powerful King's Haki unleashed, right? But by no means, none of them have been defeating the God's Knights, right? They've been delaying them, but never defeating them. And then, with Luffy himself, who has just barely unlocked, or basically scratched the surface of awakening his King's Haki, probably doesn't even realize that there is more to it that he has never really picked up on, right? Matter of fact, the strongest King's Haki attack that we have seen so far, that we can probably guarantee for certain, is probably Joy Boy's, right? Joy Boy himself actually basically put his dormant power inside Emmett, right? And then when the time comes, Emmett was supposed to unleash that power by untying the knot, which let out a giant burst of Haki, right? A giant burst of King's Haki, okay? Which itself was so powerful, it was able to send the Gorseis back to Mary Joie. But at the same time, it was also greatly felt by Imu himself, right? Now that is something here, right? Because when you go to the God Valley, right? When you're back in God Valley, right? When the whole situation where Roger, Garp, Rox, Big Mom, Kaido, Whitebeard, all of them together in their prime, literally at their strongest peak that they've probably ever been, literally all 6 of them together was not enough to do anything to Imu, right? Nothing. To the extent, nothing whatsoever. Literally Imu, in a sense, just brushed it off and said, like, what the hell was that? Please. I mean, he didn't actually say that, but you get the picture here, right? I'm sure you're getting what I'm getting at, okay? So, this King's Haki is definitely something the Luffy and the Straw Hats need to learn, right? Now, it's also important to understand here that Scupper Gabon did actually mention and actually clarify that Zoro himself has King's Haki, right? We always knew that this was probably true and stuff like that, because this was actually given to the fact that during Wano, a lot of people actually mentioned that he had King's Haki, but Zoro never really bothered to pay attention to that, right? And even to an extent, we didn't actually know if it was true ourselves, right? We didn't actually know that. It wasn't until the actual Scupper Gabon thing where he actually admitted it and actually stated that it is true, you do have King's Haki. So, in terms of the Straw Hats, officially we have Luffy and Zoro who are confirmed to have King's Haki, okay? Now, there are some other great candidates as well. A lot of people, and I'm sure if you're a big fan of Straw Hats like that, you would probably enjoy it if they have King's Haki, okay? Some people could even say that Nami herself has King's Haki, okay? I mean, Oda does tend to feature her and represent her as a queen in a lot of color spreads, okay? And given the fact here that after the Straw Hats left Wano like that, Nami did basically give out a big burst of anger and rage towards Jinbei, not in the extent that she was mad at Jinbei, but the fact that she was mad at Luffy and felt like Jinbei was going too easy on him, alright? And if you pay attention to that, Jinbei was literally freaked out because he was feeling a very intense power coming from Nami, which felt like a burst of Conqueror's Haki, okay? Or King's Haki to another extent, okay? So, literally, that could just be seen as a gag, but at the same time, Oda can actually take that and state that, oh yes, Nami does have King's Haki, okay? See, that's the thing when it comes to Oda's storywriting, right? You really have to, really pay attention to the chapters in itself, right? Because if you look at something and you ignore it and think about, oh, that's just a gag, that doesn't mean nothing, it doesn't mean anything. No, you should literally keep it in mind. Because that could always come back. And Oda could actually bring it back and state that, oh, you guys thought that this was a gag? No, that was not a gag. That was the gag, alright? Like, you're literally taking the thing that was more serious as a serious thing, when in fact here, you should be taking the thing that was the gag as the more serious thing, and the serious thing as the gag, okay? I know that probably sounded a bit weird, but I do apologize, but hey, I'm trying to make a good conversation here, okay? Alright, so, yes, the King's Haki, right? It definitely does seem to be the thing that Luffy, Zoro, and the Straw Hats will need to learn, okay? And, you see, that's actually another problem here, okay? Because, just like I mentioned, that the fact here that you have Rox, Roger, Garp, these 6 powerful characters in their young prime time days, some of them who are far older than Luffy and Zoro currently are now, still weren't enough to actually deal damage to Imu, right? And right now, Imu, who is currently in possession of Gunko on Elbaf, alright? How the heck is Luffy and Zoro going to be enough to actually topple that? Now, yes, it is important to understand here, and I do believe that this is actually something that could occur, okay? Please do not misunderstand me, alright? This needs to be very, very clear here, okay? In every scenario where Luffy is facing off against the final fight or final bad guy of the arc itself, right? There's always a case where he actually loses the fight, but then comes back, okay? I mean, depending on the fight itself, sometimes he loses more, and sometimes he loses less, okay? But in every scenario, Luffy does tend to lose the fight. Now, we have not seen Luffy go off against Imu and Gunko just yet, okay? We have not seen that just yet. Which means it could definitely be likely that Luffy will lose the fight, alright? Now, keep in mind here, right? I'm not saying lose the fight as in lose the fight, right? As in Luffy loses his life and the story's over, Oda's giving up, Oda doesn't want to have Luffy find the One Piece, right? It's like, yeah, I decided that Luffy just wasn't into it anymore. I decided, you know, I'm just going to kill Luffy off and just end the story right here, right? Just end it all willy-nilly as if no desire to prove anything, right? No, nothing like that. But lose in the extent that, like, Luffy literally has to think more logically. Luffy has to literally come up with a plan and try and figure out what he needs to do. And it's not just Luffy. Zoro himself also needs to learn this, alright? Zoro didn't even realize that he had King's Haki, okay? And it wasn't the fact until Scupper Gabon actually stated it. Even Luffy himself stated it, even freaked out. I was like, how did you not know? And by means, if Luffy and Zoro, too, are the only ones, along with Scupper Gabon as an extra help, can they really be enough? How is Oda going to actually do this? And even if you want to state that having the other Straw Hats learn Haki to open it, to allow them to learn King's Haki, will they even be enough, right? Now, yes, in terms of the Straw Hats themselves, there are 10 members, okay? And yes, I'm including Luffy in this scenario here because Luffy is technically a Straw Hat, alright? I mean, yes, he's technically the captain, but he's still technically a member, right? There are 10 members altogether, okay? That's 4 more than the whole Rocks, Roger, Garp, and all that kind of stuff, right? That's 4 additional people, okay? But at the same time, even if the Straw Hats learned King's Haki, right? Even if Luffy did give them a quick tutorial and explain how King's Haki works, and they managed to unlock it and figure it out right then and there, will they actually be enough, right? Will they actually be enough? Because even if they did, their King's Haki isn't by no means going to be on the same level as characters like Rocks, Roger, Garp, Whitebeard. By no means, it will never, ever, ever be on that level. I mean, maybe eventually down the line when they get a little extra practice in, you know, get a little more experience in, probably eventually. But in reality, it's not. And this whole regeneration thing that the God's Knights and Imu can do is a very scary thing. So, what exactly is Oda going to do here? How exactly will he utilize the King's Haki to actually defeat the God's Knights, right? And by defeat, I mean actually defeat them, right? To the point where they won't easily come back, okay? Now, yes, Oda did actually state very clearly here that Luffy doesn't actually kill his opponents, right? He more or less chooses to crush their dreams because, like, literally, Luffy doesn't want to, like, kill them like that because he doesn't really want to, like, crush their dreams, but it's more the extent of, like, he crushes their goals and stuff like that to make them realize the error of their ways, right? But these are God's Knights. These are celestial dragons who've been ruling the world for 800 years, right? They've literally enslaved and literally murdered countless peoples throughout history and time again and again. And, alright? And you really think about that, okay? Luffy is going to have to do something, alright? Oda is going to have to do something, and Luffy is going to have to do something he's never done before. Now, yes, no one wants Luffy to be a murderer, right? I don't want Luffy to be a murderer, right? That's not what his character is, and that's not what he should be, alright? But the idea here, that you think about it, it's Oda has a lot of explaining to do, and a lot of things to get into with this whole King's Haki thing, and how it can actually be utilized to defeat the God's Knights, alright? Because you really have to think about it, right? You really have to ask yourself, right? If the King's Haki so far has only been shown to basically deal damage to the God's Knights to the point where it's slowing down their regeneration ability but doesn't actually stop them, then in that case here, if you do find a way to negate their regeneration ability to a very long time, eventually they're going to come back. Eventually they will. So, in all fairness, it's really hard to really get into it. It's really hard to understand what exactly is Oda going to do here, right? Is Oda going to introduce another type of King's Haki, right? Is there another level to it that Luffy himself didn't understand, all right? Could that be something? I don't know, but I suppose it's possible. Ugh. Okay. Look, in all fairness here, the point I'm trying to make in this video, right? The point I'm trying to make is this whole regeneration thing is insane, all right? It is a force to be reckoned with, and the fact that this King's Haki thing is probably the key to actually defeating the God's Knights, but we've never seen a God's Knights or anyone who's been attacked by these Conqueror's Haki truly defeated. And by defeated, I'm only referring to the God's Knights, Celestial Dragons, in terms of like the Gorsei's themselves, right? I'm not referring to low fodder pirates or it's bandits and all those characters themselves, right? I'm not referring to them, right? We're only referring to the God's Knights and possibly even the Gorsei, okay? Only them to extent, all right? Now, right now, currently in the story itself, we are still in God Valley, right? In next chapter, we're most likely going to definitely get the whole Roger and Garp team up that was stated from Sengoku that Roger and Garp had to team up in order to take down rocks, okay? That is most likely coming. And then eventually, down the line, we're going to go back to Elbaf, and we're going to basically get the actual fight itself, right? Now, on the surface, we can probably guarantee that Luffy, Zoro, along with Scabber Gabong, and probably even Loki, are the only ones on Elbaf to really have King's Haki, okay? I don't think Loki has been confirmed to have King's Haki, but you know what? I think it's safe to say that he does have King's Haki, okay? I mean, I don't know that for sure, but let's just say for the argument that he does, right? That's 4, right? 3 humans and 1 giant, okay? So, in reality, I'm not really sure, right? I'm not exactly sure how Oda is going to actually do that. I mean, I don't want it to be the extent where Oda is just going to have to just willy-nilly just throw in the fact that the Straw Hats themselves learn King's Haki, right? Unless he can actually do something to give a better explanation, right? Unless he can actually do something to give a reason to explain why they have King's Haki so fast, right? And not make it seem like it's some kind of like a completely shoe-in storyline that makes no sense, right? It's like you're just throwing something in for the sake of like, oh, I need the Straw Hats to do this, right? But yet you're completely throwing it in without giving a proper detail, a proper explanation for it, okay? Alright, so in all fairness, I think this is where I'm going to end off on the video, right? I feel like I can go on and on and on and more on this, alright? But I feel like this is probably good enough, okay? Okay, so look, in fairness here, let me just ask you guys the question, right? Will Luffy and Zoro, Scalper Gabong, and even Loki, will their Conqueror's Haki be enough to actually defeat the God's Knights, right? Will actually be enough to actually stop them, right? And by stop them, I mean actually stop them, okay? Will the other Straw Hats actually learn King's Haki, okay? Will they actually be enough, right? I have no idea. And I do wonder what exactly Oda is going to do, alright? I do wonder that. So, I think all we can do is just basically wait to see how everything turns out, alright? Do you want the Straw Hats to learn Haki, right? Do you want them to learn King's Haki, okay? Now, yes, I imagine some people will be very glad if the Straw Hats could actually learn King's Haki, right? Maybe even other Haki, right? Observation Haki, Armament Haki, all these could be good possibilities, right? Oh yeah, some people even basically think that Nami herself, well not Nami, that Zeus himself already has Armament Haki, right? Which in fairness, I think is a very possible thing here, because if you think about it, every single time when Nami utilizes Zeus in his mace form, the texture always changes to a very black tone, right? To the same kind of black that is often used whenever characters are using Armament Haki, okay? Now, some people argue, you would probably say, oh, well, that's technically just because of his connection to the cloud. But that really doesn't make any sense here, right? That really doesn't make any sense, right? Like, I get the fact that when Zeus went in his Thundercloud Rage form, he always became black, right? To mimic the whole idea of a black thundercloud, okay? But he's not actually Cloud no more, right? He's actually Nami's Climate Tact, right? The Climate Tact itself is utilized in everything, right? So even if you want remnants of that, it's something to consider here as being a nod to it, but at the same time, it also does make a lot of sense here, right? Because he's not a cloud in that form, right? So to change the colors for that really wouldn't make a lot of sense. So I do think it's possible that he does have Armament Haki, right? That definitely is Armament Haki that Zeus is utilizing, okay? And if that means something, if Zeus himself can utilize Armament Haki, then by means, what if he could utilize King's Haki, right? I mean, I don't really know, but just to throw something in there for the sake of it, okay? Alright. So yes, this is where I'm going to end off on the video. So look, thank you so much for joining me. If you liked my video, you liked anything I presented, or anything I had to say in the video itself, please let me know in the comment section below. Feel free to subscribe to the channel, hit notification bells, and stay tuned for my next video as soon as possible, alright? Thank you so much. You all have a great day. And please, if you do like my videos, subscribe to the channel. I really want to keep building up my subscriptions as much as possible, right? So that will do it. You all have a great day. Goodbye, everybody.